Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on January 4th, 2020, and is current through the Star Trek Short Trek episode Ephraim and Dot, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest to WeeklyTrek, Heather Kirby. Heather, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since I've been on any podcast, so I was really excited to get your invitation.
Absolutely. I am thrilled to have you back. Happy New Year. We are in a new year for Star Trek, and quite a year, huh?
Oh, it is going to be a good one.
All right, well, let's kick this off. You know the drill. I ask my guests this question every week. I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
You know, I thought a while about this because there's so many exciting things, especially with this being the beginning of a new year and so many things on the horizon for Star Trek. But the answer I came up with kind of surprised myself. The one thing I'm really excited about is that this year, 2020, is the 25th anniversary of Voyager.
The 25th anniversary of Voyager. It is here. I can't believe it's been 25 years.
I can't believe it's been 25 years either. Janeway is my favorite captain, and I look forward to just celebrating the greatness that is Voyager and celebrating Janeway all year long.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this anniversary. Voyager was the first Star Trek that I mostly picked up at the beginning and carried all the way through. By the time I became a fan, Next Generation was almost finished. Deep Space Nine was well on its way, and Voyager was just kind of poking around the corner. So this was the first one that really I sort of considered myself as having followed from start to finish. And so, yeah, I'm thrilled about this anniversary. And what better way to kick off the anniversary than the appearance of 7 of 9 in Star Trek Picard?
What better way?
Do you think we will see any other Voyager characters at any point in the show?
I mean, I think there's a definite possibility, but I don't want to know ahead of time. I want to be surprised when I see someone I know from the past show up on that show. So I'm one of those people, I want it to be a surprise.
I like to think that they are keeping a couple of surprises in reserve. It would feel a little odd if they had given us literally everything in terms of who the returning characters are going to be, because then you're just kind of going through a checklist and checking them off as they appear. But yeah, it would be really cool if there was an additional cameo or appearance from a character, and maybe in Star Trek Picard Season 2, which sounds like more of a likelihood, and we'll talk about that this week. That's a fabulous one, and what a perfect way to kick off the year. And we have some big Voyager anniversary events this year. I think the whole cast pretty much is confirmed for both Star Trek Las Vegas and for Destination Star Trek in London. And for the Destination Star Treks, they have the addition of having put together, we've not seen what it looks like yet, but very exciting, a recreation of the Voyager bridge on which you can get your picture taken with the Voyager cast. That's very, very exciting indeed. So lots to look forward to. So my pick for thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is we have gotten a couple more kind of short TV spot trailers for Star Trek Picard, which is now closing in on 2 weeks away from its premiere. And there's not a huge amount to talk about in the teasers because mostly they're just recut footage from San Diego Comic-Con trailer and the New York Comic-Con trailer that we've already talked about. But there is one thing that really stood out and that's got people talking and that I'm thrilled by. And there is an old shot of Data. It's the same shot from the final seconds of the San Diego Comic-Con trailer, but it does look like the effects work on Data is now finished, and the final presentation of Data looks really, really good. I mean, to my eyes, having compared the quick shot of him in this little teaser with his last appearance in Star Trek Nemesis, they have done a really fabulous job of matching up the way that Data looked in his final appearance with his upcoming appearance in Star Trek Picard, which is no inconsiderable feat, given that nearly 20 years have passed in between, and Brent, given that he is human, has aged 2 decades in the interim. So there was a lot of discussion when the first trailers came out about how Data looked, because the effects work was not finished and the look was not great, honestly, but it looks like it's now in tip-top shape, and I'm feeling really, really excited about that. Heather, have you seen these pictures going around?
I have seen these pictures, and I think it's one thing, like, a lot of lay people don't understand is that when that initial trailer comes out, not everything is exactly finished. So I think looking at the newer pictures, he does definitely look really close to Nemesis Data, and it's going to be interesting, especially with all the new technology out today, how they really match that up and they can do things like that they couldn't do back when they filmed Nemesis to make him appear younger. So it's really cool.
Yeah, the one thing we've not gotten a good look at yet is the hairline. The only place we saw that was in the New York Comic-Con trailer, and that also was a bit ropey. So fingers crossed they've also made significant improvements there. Brent Spiner also said, even for the New York Comic-Con trailer, that those effects weren't finished. They probably weren't finished until just a few weeks ago, because a lot of this stuff does run right up to the wire. So very, very exciting, and we are in full-on hype mode for Star Trek Picard, which is a good segue into us talking about the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our first story this week broke just before Christmas, which is that the California Film Commission has awarded Star Trek Picard Season 2 with $20 million worth of tax incentives. The first season of Star Trek Picard also got a set of tax incentives. Those have been increased for this season from $15.6 million to $20 million. CBS has not officially commented on a second season for Star Trek Picard, but many in the trade press, like The Hollywood Reporter and Variety, took the news of the awarding of tax credits for Star Trek Picard Season 2 as confirmation that it has been renewed for a second season in advance of the first season even premiering. If you are an avid listener of Weekly Trek, this will not be a surprise to you, because TrekCore interviewed Alex Kurtzman at New York Comic-Con back in October, and he did indicate at the time that preparation work for Star Trek Picard Season 2 was well underway. So it seems like it is a sure-run thing that Picard will be renewed for a second season. We don't have official confirmation on that yet. The expectation is that will probably come at some point shortly after the premiere for Star Trek Picard. But it does sound like, absent an official confirmation, it is happening. We do have a second season of Star Trek Picard on the way, and going into the first season, that is really exciting to know that there's an extra 10 episodes coming. Heather, are you looking forward to Season 2 of Star Trek Picard?
Of course I am. I am looking forward to Season 2 before Season 1 even hits. I think it's really a good sign that California offered even more tax credits to keep the filming in California, because nowadays, if people think of California as the place where all the TV shows and Hollywood stuff is made, but nowadays it's so much cheaper to go to places like Toronto, where Discovery is filmed, or Vancouver, where a lot of different shows are filmed, instead of keeping it in California. So I think it's a really good sign for Season 2 that they offered even more than they did for Season 1 to keep it in California. It'll keep Patrick Stewart happy, because I know he has a house there. And I'm excited for more Star Trek Picard before Season 1 even hits the airways. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, Picard is really the aberration for the current generation of Star Trek, in that it's filmed in California, because Discovery, as you say, is filmed up in Toronto. And from everything we've been told by the executive producers, the plan is for all future Star Trek to be filmed up in Toronto with the Toronto team, with the exception of Star Trek Picard. It does seem like part of Patrick Stewart's conditions for returning was that he didn't have to schlep up to Toronto for 6 months, and that he could do it in California California. And so they sort of bent over backwards to accommodate him with that. But the great thing about that too is, because they're in California, it does mean that it's much, much easier to get some of these other actors in for, quick cameos or appearances in the show, because they don't have to fly them out to Canada. They can just drive them up from LA to the studio where they film Star Trek Picard. So very, very exciting. And we are waiting with bated breath for official confirmation. But if it's good enough for the trade press, it's probably that's probably a very sure bet that a second season of Star Trek Picard is on the way, which is great, because flashing back a year ago, Patrick Stewart, while he was on his press tour for that kids movie he was doing a year ago, was talking about how they thought there were 3 seasons worth of story for Picard. So we will now have 2 out of 3 seasons on the way, which is really, really exciting. In addition to news of a second season for Star Trek Picard, we also got our first look at Hugh Borg. So this was an exclusive in TV Line. We got our first clear shot of Jonathan Del Arco as Hugh in Star Trek Picard. We'd gotten a quick, blurry, in-motion shot of him in the New York Comic-Con trailer that indicated that he had a mostly human appearance, or a non-Borg appearance, since we don't actually know what Hugh's race is. But this is our first clear still image of the character, and also the character's makeup, which I think is great. There are a lot of similarities with the makeup for 7 of 9. He has these sort of vestigial Borg implants around his eye where the ocular implant was. And of course, if you remember, Hugh had this sort of very large ocular implant that sat over most of his face. And this is a really nice touch, there's a scar line that runs around the shape of where that prosthetic was in the Borg makeup. Really, really cool to get a look at this. Heather, first reactions to Hugh Borg?
I think he looks phenomenal. I think the makeup that they did for Hugh was a lot... It was kind of a natural evolution for his character, especially the last time we saw him. He kind of separated himself from the collective and kind of broke off using his own mind and his own ideas. So I think removing a lot of his major implants like they did with 7 was definitely the next step for his character. So it makes sense to see him like that. And I think he looked great. He's one of those guys I'm like, oh wow, I didn't realize he was that cute. So yeah, it's exciting to see, even like we talk about seeing 7 and Data and Riker and Troy in Picard, but it's really exciting to see them bring back even a smaller character like Hugh, who was only involved in 2-3 episodes in Next Generation, and still bring him back and have him a part of the story. So I'm really interested to see where they go with that.
And what do you think about that costume? To my mind, I can't decide if it is... It sort of looks like it's Borg inspired in some ways. I mean, it's sort of, gray and silver and has this detailing on it that sort of looks kind of similar-ish to the sort of detailing you would see on a Borg cube. But the shapes and the cut of it also remind me of the Romulan outfits too, the sort of triangular kind of breastplate kind of sort of thing he's wearing does make me think Romulan also. It's a cool design though, don't you think?
Oh, it's definitely a cool design, and it does take a lot of inspiration from, like you said, both Borg and Romulan. So it's one of those things, like, we know the Romulans are involved in the story, and we know the Borg are somehow involved in this story, and it gives you hints when you see the costume design like that, like somehow they're going to tie this together, but we just don't know yet until we actually see it on screen.
Yeah, the only thing I keep thinking about this show is I don't think we have a really clear idea of what the show is or what it's about yet. And we won't until it premieres. All we have to go off of is the stuff that we've gotten in the trailers and the things that are in the Picard Countdown comic that continues to sort of tease out things, but doesn't yet really, they've not yet shown their hand on what the show is about. What are the connections between the Romulans and the Borg? What is the data angle? How do all these things tie together with each other? What is the big event that leads Picard to leave Starfleet? A lot of that is still very much under wraps, which is also very exciting because sort of contrasted a little bit with the most recent Star Wars movie, where they really told you a lot about that movie before it came out. They sort of telegraphed that a number of the sort of big beats of the story that were coming. You know, the main villain was revealed in advance, was not a surprise. And so you went into that movie and, you know, regardless of whether folks liked it or didn't like it, you did go into that movie with a sense of, I think I have a good idea of where this is going, or at least what the final confrontation is going to be is pretty clear to me. But with Picard, I don't really have that sense. You know, how do all these different disparate pieces fit together? What's the ultimate end game? What's the ultimate mission? What's the kind of quest that Picard is clearly going on? All of that still remains really under wraps, which is very exciting because it means we get to peel that onion together rather than through the story showing us the peeling of the onion, rather than us going into it and being like, okay, well, I wonder when the big confrontation with X will take place.
I think that's something that Star Trek does really well. Like, they don't want you to know the whole story before you get to it, because they want you to see it unfold like that. And so that's why, like, people get all upset because they have stuff so much under wraps and people want to know what's going on right then, right now. But then, like, when you actually get to see it unfold on the screen and understand it with the story as you're watching it, it's so much more exciting that way.
I agree. And luckily for us, we are very close now to actually knowing what that is. You know, by the time this episode drops, we will be 2.5 weeks away from the premiere. So,
oh my gosh, 2.5 weeks. Yay!
There is not a lot of time left to wait. Well, we will leave Star Trek Picard there for now, because I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about in the weeks ahead as it relates to Picard. But let's shift from TV to movies and ask the question, what the hell is going on with Star Trek movies?
Oh my gosh.
And the answer over the Christmas period is still very much we don't really know. I've been hosting the show for a year now, and I think I've done a variation on this story sort of several times. And so we'll agglomerate together sort of everything we learned or didn't learn about the state of Star Trek movies over the last few weeks. But we sort of more or less end up back where we started. It begins with Quentin Tarantino saying that he thought that he was moving away from Star Trek as an idea for his quote-unquote last movie, because he'd said he was only going to do a certain number of movies, and now he's done all except one of those. So he was giving an interview to Consequence of Sound, and he said something to the effect of, I think I'm steering away from Star Trek, but I haven't had an official conversation with those guys yet. That, of course, then lit up the internet as, you know, Quentin Tarantino moving away from Star Trek, it's probably not going to happen. But then in an interview with Deadline later on that same day, he said, you know, the project was not officially dead, and that he hadn't completely decided on what he was doing. But it certainly sounds, you know, like the Tarantino Star Trek movie is moving in a negative direction. And Heather, I think it was on, you were my previous guest on an episode where we were talking about the Tarantino project. I think maybe even when it was first announced.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we'd sort of given our opinions on it at the time, but what do you think is going on? Do you think this Tarantino thing's ever going to see the light of day?
I hope not. I think it's pretty, I mean, with a few differing opinions, I think it's pretty much unanimous across the Star Trek universe that a Tarantino Star Trek movie is not something most of us want to see. So I hope it doesn't see the light of day. It's not something I'm really interested in and or looking forward to. I think Tarantino talks too much.
Definitely true.
He doesn't even really know what he wants to do yet, and so he keeps talking about, oh well, maybe I'm going to move away from this, or oh well, maybe I'm going to move away from that. Like I don't really believe anything until like there's a script, cast, set, it started shooting. That's when I'll believe it's going to happen. But for right now, I don't see it happening, and I don't really want it to.
We're coming up on 4 years since Star Trek Beyond was released, and it's been 4 years of this same kind of, is a movie happening? Is a movie not happening? And Tarantino wasn't the only one talking about the next Star Trek movie over the holidays. Simon Pegg also was giving an interview and was asked about Star Trek movies and gave, again, a totally sort of contradictory perspective on the things that we had heard about what was going on with Star Trek 4. So, you know, he said he thought that the Tarantino movie was very much still in the mix. So either he had not yet heard Tarantino saying he thought he was moving away from it, or he knows something different. Of course, Simon Pegg, in addition to being Scotty in the Kelvin Timeline cast, also co-wrote Star Trek Beyond. So has a bit more of an insight into the production side of Star Trek movies than, let's say, John Cho or Carl Urban would. But then he also said he was talking about Star Trek 4 in the Noah Hawley news, which we reported on a few weeks ago, that Noah Hawley, the creator of Legion and one of the executive producers of Fargo, is close to finalizing a deal with Paramount to both write and direct a new version of Star Trek 4, different from the S.J. Clarkson previous Star Trek 4 that had been announced, I guess, a little over a year ago, and then had been canned. And Simon Pegg said he did not think that his cast would necessarily be involved in the Noah Hawley movie, which it had seemed like from the initial reporting they would be. So again, no idea what that movie is. Is it the Kelvin Timeline cast? Is it not? At this point, it would just be really nice if somebody in a position of authority at Paramount would tell us what's going on with the Star Trek movies, if they would please make a decision and then tell the Star Trek fans about it. 4 years of limbo is a lot, and we don't kind of enjoy or appreciate this sort of back and forth over what's going on with the movies. Just make a decision and do something, please. It's been 4 years. Either do it or don't, and tell the people involved that they're involved, and let's get started. I mean, it does sound like something is happening. The Paramount CEO, I guess he's not the Paramount CEO anymore, he's the sort of head of the Paramount division of Viacom CBS, was talking about how there are at least 2 Star Trek movies under development, but it would be really nice if we could move beyond the development phase and into the actually making a movie phase, because it's really tiresome for us to keep having this back and forth. Heather, what would you want to see out of a Star Trek 4?
I'm not sure. I mean, I really enjoyed the Kelvin movies, and I think Paramount has just put themselves in this position where they know that Star Trek is a franchise that can make them money, but they're not quite sure how to handle it. And so they're in this back and forth position where they don't know what to do with it. And so they keep throwing out ideas like, oh, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to do this. And nothing has stuck to the wall yet. They keep throwing ideas at the wall and nothing's sticking. So I would love to see another Star Trek movie. I'm not sure if I want to see the entire Kelvin cast again. It depends on what they come up with and what kind of story they decide. I was really excited when I heard the stories about Noah Hawley writing and directing a movie, because I think he is a lot better choice than Tarantino. I can get behind a Noah Hawley Star Trek movie. It's going to be something different and unique, but in a good way for science fiction, because he creates just beautiful movies, and it has the potential to be confusing and crazy, but in a very beautiful way. So I'm definitely behind the idea of Noah Hawley doing a Star Trek movie. But like I said, I won't believe anything is actually going to come to it until, like you said, someone from Paramount makes a decision and comes out there and says, this is what we're going to do. Because right now we just have a whole bunch of different voices talking, but it's not someone actually coming from the studio and saying it's going to happen.
I think that's the smart move, honestly, at this point. We'll keep kind of, as there are new developments, sort of letting folks know, like the Tarantino thing where he says he doesn't think he's going to do it anymore is a big development. But until we hear something concrete, I think I'm going to preference other news stories over the latest kind of cast comments of the day as it relates to Star Trek 4. So we'll put the Star Trek 4 movie conversation aside and switch back to the television side of production for our last story, which relates to the most recent short trek, Ephraim and Dot, which was a lovely little short trek. If you haven't seen it yet, recommend skipping ahead a couple of minutes as we now chat spoilers about the short trek. But IndieWire put together a little video with Michael Giacchino, the director of Ephraim and Dot, talking about the making of the short, what the kind of the genesis of it was, what he wanted to get out of it. And there were some interesting little tidbits about it. So I guess it seems like Alex Kurtzman approached Giacchino and asked him if he wanted to direct. And it seems like when they'd done so, the idea that it would be an animated short trek, that it would involve a tardigrade and one of the Dot Sevens had already been fleshed out, but the story of what that meant and the idea of doing the sort of look back over the whole history of the Enterprise was actually something that came from the mind of Giacchino himself. He said he wanted it to be an emotional Tom and Jerry that takes place on the Enterprise. Actually, I think that's very much what it is, and they were very successful in putting together a short that does have that sort of Looney Tunes-esque quality to it. Not just in terms of the interactions of the characters, Ephraim and Dot, over the course of the short, not just that it tells a complete kind of emotional arc for both of those characters over a short period of time, but also, frankly, in the animation style. And they talk about this in the video, about how, CG animation doesn't tend to do a lot of the sort of absurd physicality that there was in the old kind of Tom and Jerry cartoons, that they try and keep it as lifelike as possible, even when the creatures themselves aren't, lifelike, like a tardigrade with giant eyes. But that was something they really wanted to do for this one, was to put in some of that kind of older sort of physicality to the character's movement, like, the arms sort of randomly extending outwards and back again. And we know, which is all fabulous and actually increases the humor of the piece when you get those kinds of moments. But this was really cool little making of video. Heather, were you a fan of Ephraim and Dot?
I was a fan, and I enjoyed the video and listening to him talk about the inspiration behind it, because you can see that in the short. I mean, it definitely feels like an older style Tom and Jerry cartoon, which is the type of cartoons that I grew up with. People my age, your age, probably around the same age, grew up with like those Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, things like that. And it definitely had that feel to it. So it was really cool listening to him talk about it. And and it's kind of funny to think when Kurtzman offered him the opportunity to direct one of these shorts, I think Kurtzman knew exactly which one he was going to pick. But like the way he described it, he's like, oh yeah, he offered it to me. And then said, oh, we have animated. And then said, oh, I know you're going to like this one. So he totally had him in mind for this short. And it really fit his style and his background, because it's basically animation put to music. And Michael, being a composer, of course, did it so well. And I wasn't sure about some of the upcoming animated Star Trek, because I'm not a big comedy fan. So I know the series I'm not quite sure about, but I wasn't sure when they said these two shorts would be animated if I would enjoy them. But I did. They're just wonderful. And he did a wonderful job.
Yeah, me too. They definitely, I think I am more kind of excited about the animated TV shows, but that's definitely been a process for me of becoming excited with them. When they were first announced, I don't think I was as interested. Now I would say I'm very interested. And these two little shorts also kind of helped continue to push that process along for me by seeing that I could really enjoy something that was animated, that was quite different, that sort of took ideas in an unconventional direction.
Oh, exactly. And both of these shorts especially were two different styles of animation. So two different examples of how they could do animation and do it well and make it interesting and make you excited about it.
So lots to look forward to. And this sort of whets our appetite for the next animated project up on deck, which is Lower Decks, which it sounds like certainly over the last few weeks has inched closer to them. We don't have a premiere date yet, but everything from the sort of look aheads that like StarTrek.com has done for 2020, Lower Decks season 1 is on there. So it definitely seems like we are getting that project this year as well. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So we will kick off 2020 by each giving a wish or theory about Star Trek, Picard, Discovery, anything about the franchise. So Heather, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Oh, I love to go big on my wishes and my theories.
Go big.
So my big wish for the year of 2020 is that this will be the year that someone in Star Trek gets nominated for an acting Emmy.
All right. Got any thoughts on who it's going to be?
I think it's going to be Patrick Stewart.
I think that's, if anyone's going to get it, it's got to be him, right?
Exactly. It's one of those things, especially bringing back such a nostalgic character like Picard, and especially with big award shows like that, they love to honor people just for nostalgia. It's sad to say that, but they do. So I think if anyone is going to break through that science fiction barrier when it comes to acting awards at the Emmys, it's going to be Patrick Stewart's performance in Picard. And I know that's really big to say considering we haven't seen any of it yet, but I believe that's going to happen. At least I wish it will happen.
I mean, I've always felt that Star Trek, the various Star Trek shows have been unfairly snubbed by award shows in anything other than the technical categories. I mean, I know they won Emmys this year, most notably for the makeup, but Star Trek's never, with the exception of the final season of The Next Generation, which was nominated for an Emmy, they've not really gotten Emmy nominations in either the acting or the best series categories. And in some cases, I think that's a real oversight, right? Like, season 7 of The Next Generation was not the best season of Star Trek The Next Generation. If that warranted an Emmy nomination, why did not season 4 or 5 warrant an Emmy nomination that year? But the sort of level of acceptance for genre shows in major awards presentations has definitely increased a lot over the last few years, thanks to things like Game of Thrones, for example, which has won a bunch of Emmys. So, I think Star Trek is in assuming that the show is really good, which is what we hope it will be and we pray it will be. And we don't have any reason to expect necessarily that it won't, certainly not with the talent both in front of and behind the camera on this show. But assuming that it's really good, I mean, I think, Star Trek is well placed with a really good show to break into some of those Emmy consideration categories. And so fingers firmly crossed that A, it's good, and B, that it then gets the recognition that it deserves. So that is a fabulous big picture, big think theory, Heather, and I love it. So my theory this week is actually not my theory. It is a listener submission. That's right. If you have a theory or wish, don't forget to send them my way and we will feature them on the show. I think I featured everyone that somebody has sent to me, so send them my way. So the theory this week comes from previous Weekly Trek guest, Ron Roble, and his theory relates to Children of Mars, the short trek that will be released later this week. And his theory is that we will see a glimpse of Sir Patrick Stewart in the short trek. He says he doesn't think he'll have any lines, maybe will only be visible from the back, but he thinks there will be some kind of shot of Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard in Children of Mars. Heather, do you think we'll be seeing Sir Patrick Stewart as Picard in Children of Mars?
I'm going to turn this on the head a little bit on his theory here, and I don't think we will see him, but I think we will hear his voice.
Okay.
Because it depends on where exactly, like along the timeline that we're talking about, that they want to set Children of Mars. I get the feeling it's set probably at least a few years before Picard, but it's going to give you hints as to what's going to happen in the show. So if it's set earlier than Picard actually is, I don't think they want to actually show Picard, just for the aging process things, depending on where it's set. But I have a feeling you might hear his voice at some point in it.
Very exciting. Well, it is only a couple of days away. So, Ron, you don't have long to wait in order to find out whether you have earned the coveted gold star for submitting a correct wish or theory to Weekly Trek. I wish I could win one of those myself one of these days. My theories and wishes never seem to quite break out the way that I think they will. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and you could also get your theory featured on next week's episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Heather Kirby, for joining me today. Heather, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can primarily find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @NerdyGal33, with my username being Never Apologize for Being Nerdy.
Which is a credo to live by. And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you'll turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Heather. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.